Why is it hard for Hispanics to achieve mainstream success in hip-hop? Latinos make up over 19% of the United States population. That is nearly 1 in every 5 people walking around in this country. And yet, if you look at the Billboard Hot 100 right now and count how many Hispanic rappers are in the top 20, you'll be done in about 10 seconds. How does that happen? How is it that a community so large, culturally rich, and deeply embedded in hip-hop's history can still seem invisible within the genre they helped contribute to? And before anyone jumps in the comments, no, this isn't about Bad Bunny. We're going to get to him, but Bad Bunny is actually the exception that proves the rule. Stick with me because this goes way deeper than most people realize. Let's start at the beginning, because here's something most people don't know, or maybe they just forgot. Hip-hop was born in the Bronx. But what nobody tells you is that the Bronx in 1973 was heavily Latino. Puerto Rican and Dominican families had been flooding into that borough since the 1950s. The environment that gave birth to hip-hop wasn't just black, it was black and brown. Side by side, sharing hallways and block parties and experiencing similar struggles. Some of the earliest b-boys to represent the culture were Latino. Crazy Legs from the Rocksteady crew, one of the most celebrated b-boys in history, is Puerto Rican. Prince Marky D of the Fat Boys and Tito of the Fearless Four are all Latino pioneers who helped lay the groundwork for future generations of other Latinos to follow. DJ Disco Wiz, one of hip-hop's early DJs, was Puerto Rican. He was literally spinning records alongside Kool Herc and Grandmaster Flash. A shift occurred as hip-hop transitioned from street culture to corporate settings. Latino contributions to hip-hop were increasingly overlooked in the mainstream, with industry leaders controlling who would represent the genre. While Black Americans created and popularized hip-hop, Latinos also deserved more recognition in the mainstream. Now let's talk about something that comes up every time this conversation happens. The most obvious barrier: language. For decades, the unwritten rule in the American music industry was simple. If you want mainstream success, you sing in English. Full stop. Think about what Ricky Martin and Shakira had to do to cross over. Ricky Martin performed at the Grammys in 1999, blew the roof off the place, and what was the industry's response? Not, "This man is brilliant," it was, "How do we make it Latin without being too Latin?" Their actual words. That condescension tells you everything you need to know. Shakira's first English-language album, Laundry Service, came out in 2001, and that's when her international career really exploded. She had to essentially become a different artist for American audiences to accept her. For Latino rappers specifically, this was even more complicated. If your whole style is Spanglish, if your flow is built around the cadence of Spanish, you were automatically getting shoved into the Latin music bin at the record store, not the hip-hop bin. And those bins had very different budgets, very different promotions, and very different radio rotations. Mellow Man Ace, the Cuban-American rapper widely called the godfather of Latin rap, had a platinum single in 1989 called Mentirosa, a genuinely groundbreaking bilingual track. It hit big. And then, the industry didn't know what to do with him. Was he hip-hop? Was he Latin pop? That confusion cost him and a whole generation of artists tremendously. The language barrier wasn't just about what fans preferred. It was about how the industry categorized artists and, therefore, invested in them. If you didn't fit neatly into the English-speaking hip-hop box, you were getting less label money, less radio play, and less of a shot. The identity trap. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. The music industry has this nasty habit of making artists of color choose between their culture and their commercial ambitions. And for Hispanic artists, this choice has always been brutal. You've heard of Bruno Mars, right? Massive star, Grammy winner, one of the biggest pop and R&B artists of the last 20 years. But here's what most people don't know or don't think about. His real name is Peter Hernandez. He's half Puerto Rican, half Filipino. And the industry made it very clear very early that Peter Hernandez wasn't going to sell records. Bruno Mars could. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's just how the machine works. Richard Valenzuela became Richie Valens back in the 1950s for the same reason. The industry has a long history of sanding down ethnic identity to make it more palatable, their word, not mine, to white mainstream audiences. For Hispanic rappers who refused to hide where they came from, the price was real. Fat Joe stayed Fat Joe, Big Pun stayed Big Pun, and both of them faced significant barriers getting mainstream crossover despite being absolutely elite-level artists. More so Big Pun, but you get the point. Big Pun was the first solo Latino rapper to go platinum with Capital Punishment in 1998. The first in 1998, after nearly 30 years of hip-hop's existence. Think about how long that took, and think about how quickly artists from other backgrounds were crossing over during that same era. There's also the issue of what happens when Latino artists fully embrace their identity in hip-hop spaces. They often get coded as regional artists. Chicano rap out of California, massive dedicated fanbase, critical to understanding West Coast hip-hop history. But mainstream America largely treated it like a niche genre for a specific audience rather than a legitimate lane of the art form. Lil Rob, South Park Mexican, artist with genuine regional power who never got the national spotlight they deserved. The implicit message to Hispanic artists was always the same. Be Latino just enough to feel authentic, but not so Latino that the mainstream audience doesn't feel excluded. The industry machine. Let's zoom out for a second and talk about the structural side of this. For most of hip-hop's history, major record labels have been run predominantly by white executives. Even today, black executives in the music industry are largely concentrated in urban departments, a term that's its own whole conversation, while white executives move freely across genres. And Latino executives, even harder to find in positions of real decision-making power. When the people deciding who gets signed, who gets a budget, and who gets radio pushes, who gets a budget, who gets radio pushes, and who gets the priority artist label, don't look like you and don't fully understand your cultural context, you're already working uphill. Latin rap thrived in places like Southern California, Texas, and Miami, with, as the data shows, little promotion despite the massive Latino populations in those regions. Labels weren't investing in the communities that were actually consuming this music in huge numbers. The audience was there, the artists were there. The infrastructure just wasn't being built around them. And then there's radio. For a long time, radio was how you made it in hip-hop. Your song needed to hit urban radio stations to get traction. But urban radio formats, largely controlled by major media conglomerates, had their own ideas about what urban sounded like. If your flow had too much Spanish in it, if your beat sampled Celia Cruz instead of James Brown, you might find your music getting fewer spins, fewer primetime airplays, fewer of everything that turns a regional artist into a national one. This isn't some abstract injustice either. It has direct financial consequences. Less radio play means less exposure, means less ticket sales, means less leverage in contract negotiations. It's a cycle that compounds over time. There's one more layer here that doesn't get talked about enough: the in-between problem. In the United States, race and culture have always been viewed through a very specific binary lens: black and white. The nuance of what it means to be Latino in America, a community that spans races, nationalities, skin tones, languages, and traditions, doesn't fit neatly into that frame. An Afro-Latino rapper enters a room and is often categorized as black by record labels, similar to rapper Fabulous. Conversely, a lighter-skinned Hispanic American rapper might be told they are not hip-hop enough, as in the case of Pitbull. With Pitbull having to face the extra challenge of proving himself to a black fanbase that rightfully considers hip-hop their cultural product, while also trying to appeal to mainstream audiences who view him as Latin music. This double bind is something artists like Immortal Technique, who's fiercely proud of his heritage, have spoken about in their journey. He built a large independent following and became one of the most respected underground rappers, all without support from mainstream labels or radio. His music sold, his concerts sold out, and the industry essentially pretended he didn't exist. the streaming shift and Bad Bunny's moment. Now, here's where the story starts to turn, because something genuinely did change. Streaming killed the gatekeeper model. Radio stations, label executives, and traditional media used to be the absolute deciders of what became popular. When Spotify and YouTube came along, the audience got to vote directly. And the audience, it turns out, doesn't care about the industry's boxes. Bad Bunny became the most streamed artist on Spotify in 2020, 21, and 22. 3 consecutive years. His 2022 album Un Verano Sin Ti was the first Spanish-language album ever nominated for the Grammy Award for Album of the Year. It was also the most streamed album on Spotify at the time. All of this in Spanish. He never recorded an English crossover hit. He never changed his name. He never filed down his Puerto Rican identity to make it more digestible. As one music journalist put it, Latin acts never had the same distribution, the same radio airplay, the same award show nominations, or the same opportunities for live appearances as mainstream acts, even when their global sales merited it. Bad Bunny crashed through all of that at once because streaming bypassed the machine entirely. But here's the thing, and this is the point that matters. Bad Bunny being able to do what he has done so far doesn't mean the industry barriers are gone. It means one extraordinary artist with a once-in-a-generation talent found a way through a crack in the wall. The wall is still there. So where does that leave us? Latinos contributed significantly to hip-hop from the beginning. In the Bronx, they were spinning records, breaking on cardboard, and writing rhymes as they learned the scene. They grew up immersed in the culture, yet the industry erected barriers around them, deciding who would be its main face. These barriers, including language obstacles, identity challenges, structural gatekeeping, racial margins, and the investment gap, are no coincidence. They are the inevitable outcomes of an industry historically run by people who never considered Latino audiences as their primary market or regarded Latino artists as legitimate mainstream voices. The streaming era has started to change that, with Bad Bunny and Karol G paving the way. However, for the current generation of Hispanic kids stepping into the mic, the work remains unfinished.